Welcome to the deep dive.
So today we are going to be tackling something that's constantly at work all around us. We just don't often see it. And that is how we prevent unwanted growth, biological growth, on surfaces.
Yeah.
You sent over a really comprehensive set of research looking at this challenge, both on land and in marine environments.
Yeah.
Just think about it, from keeping mildew off your bathroom tiles to stopping barnacles from clinging to ships.
That's right. And I think what struck me immediately when looking at all the research that you sent was just the sheer amount of different scientific fields that this touches on.
Yeah.
We're talking nanotechnology, polymer science, surface science, coating technology. You even get into the principles of how fluids move and marine biology.
Yeah.
It's really highlights just how multifaceted and cutting edge this field has become.
Absolutely. So at its heart, we're dealing with this fundamental problem of fouling, which is just the attachment and growth of organisms, whether it's algae and slime in the ocean or mold and grime on land.
Yeah. So what is so compelling about this is that we're going to be exploring the clever strategies that both nature and human ingenuity are developing to combat this.
Yeah.
And what's really exciting is that there's been this huge shift towards more environmentally sound solutions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's dive in. And I think to get started, it's really fascinating to see how nature has tackled this challenge.
Yeah.
And it seems that there are two primary routes that we see, depending on if we're on terra firma or under the waves.
What's really cool here is that nature almost employs opposing tactics depending on which environment you're in.
Right.
So if you're on land, the dominant strategy appears to be what's called superhydrophobicity.
Right.
And that's this extreme water repellency.
Okay, so superhydrophobicity, I mean, that's a very scientific term.
It is.
But as I understand it, it's all about surfaces that are really good at shedding water.
Exactly.
And the classic example that everyone thinks about is the lotus leaf. Yeah.
Precisely. The lotus effect is iconic in the field.
Right.
And what scientists have discovered is that lotus leaves have this remarkable ability to stay clean because water droplets just roll right off, taking dirt and contaminants with them.
Right.
And the key here is that it's not simply just a smooth surface. It's a combination of tiny, intricate micro and nanostructures on the leaf, almost like a microscopic landscape of hills and valleys.
Okay.
And all of that is coated with a waxy material that has very low surface energy.
Gotcha. So it is the texture
Yeah.
at that incredibly small scale that's so crucial.
Exactly.
It's not just that it's waxy. It's that the wax is on this kind of bumpy, hilly surface.
That's right. So this rough surface minimizes how much the water droplet can actually touch the leaf.
Right.
And that, coupled with the low surface energy of that wax, think of surface energy as like how sticky a surface is for liquids.
Okay.
So a low energy surface means that liquids don't want to spread out.
Right.
So all of that leads to the water forming these almost spherical droplets.
Yeah.
These have a very high contact angle, somewhere around 161 degrees.
Okay.
And what's really clever is the sliding angle is only about 2 degrees.
Wow.
So even a slight tilt and those water droplets, along with the dirt, will just roll right off. And this is a fundamental design principle for us to think about when trying to create these types of self-cleaning surfaces. It's this two-tiered roughness coupled with a low-energy material.
Yeah, 161 degrees.
Yeah.
I mean, that really paints a picture of how, that water is behaving on that surface. It's almost a sphere.
That's right.
So it's that extreme angle that prevents the adhesion.
Exactly.
And it's not unique to lotus leaves, is it?
It's not.
I know rose petals and cicada wings were mentioned in your sources.
You're right. Many other land-based natural surfaces exhibit this superhydrophobicity.
Okay.
Rose petals, for instance, have a similar hierarchical structure, but with different microscopic features, which can actually cause water droplets to stick,
Okay.
almost like a controlled grip. And then cicada wings, they have arrays of these nanopillars that contribute not only to the water repellency, but also antibacterial properties.
Ah.
So the key here is that nature fine-tunes these micro and nanostructures to achieve specific functionalities.
So it's the precise arrangement of these tiny bumps.
Exactly.
And the specific chemical makeup that gives these plants and insects their self-cleaning ability.
That's right.
So what are the fundamental principles here? I know I came across terms like the Wenzel and Cassie Baxter models in the sources. What are those all about?
So behind these natural phenomena are some scientific models. Think of them as frameworks that help us understand why these surfaces behave the way they do.
Okay.
So the Wenzel model essentially states that surface roughness amplifies the inherent wettability of a material.
Okay.
So if a material is naturally hydrophobic, making it rougher will make it even more water repellent.
Okay.
And conversely, a rough hydrophilic surface will become even more water attracting. So it's all about increasing the effective surface area that's in contact with the liquid.
Okay. Yeah. So it's just more area for interaction if the material likes water and less if it doesn't.
That's exactly right.
And what about the Kessie-Baxter model?
So the Kessie-Baxter model comes into play when air gets trapped within the rough surface.
Okay.
So instead of the water contacting the entire solid surface, it sits on top of a composite of solid and trapped air.
Gotcha.
This significantly reduces the actual contact area between the water and the solid.
Right.
And that leads to those very high contact angles and therefore superhydrophobicity.
I see. I see. So the roughness like makes these little microscopic pockets of air and the water can't penetrate that.
That's right.
Okay. That's pretty clever. Now, how do we go about mimicking these innovations of nature when it comes to creating our own superhydrophobic surfaces for, use on land?
Well, the good news is that with all of the advances in nanotechnology that we've had, we have this diverse toolkit of fabrication techniques that we can use.
Okay.
Things like light irradiation, solvent evaporation, wet chemical etching, plasma polymerization, which uses ionized gases to modify surfaces, even using natural templates like the lotus leaf wax to create replicas.
Okay.
It's really quite ingenious.
It sounds like a lot of intricate work, though.
It is.
What are some of the challenges then in making these lab-grown superhydrophobic surfaces practical, for everyday applications?
One of the biggest hurdles is ensuring that they're robust.
Okay.
These delicate micro nanostructures that we're creating, they can be easily damaged by abrasion,
Right.
or become clogged with contaminants, which would significantly reduce their effectiveness.
Right. So your super repellent coating rubs off,
Right.
or it gets filled with dirt.
Yeah.
Not very practical. Any ways that researchers are trying to overcome those limitations?
Absolutely. So one solution researchers are looking at is trying to use materials that inherently have low surface energy
Okay.
and kind of incorporating these structures throughout the material, not just on the very top layer,
Okay.
so that, some surface damage doesn't eliminate the effect.
Gotcha.
Another promising approach that your sources highlighted is pre-modifying metal powders before actually creating the final product.
Okay.
So there are a number of ways to try to combat this.
So that's more promising for creating a durable, long-lasting, super hydrophobic material.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on from land-based self-cleaning, I know the outline mentioned anisotropic wettability.
Right.
And butterfly wings is an example. What is that all about?
So this is where you have surfaces that exhibit different wetting properties depending on the direction that the liquid is moving.
Okay.
Butterfly wings are a prime example of this. So they're multi-scale photonic structures. These are the same structures that give them those really vibrant colors. They create directional adhesion.
Okay.
So imagine a water droplet rolling off very easily in one direction, but adhering more strongly in another.
Oh, wow. So different levels of stickiness depending on which way the water's flowing.
Exactly.
That's remarkable.
Well, and scientists believe this arises from ratchet-like structures on the surface at a microscopic level.
Wow.
And this could have really interesting potential applications in areas like microfluidics
Okay.
for controlling the movement of really tiny liquid volumes,
Okay.
or even in creating surfaces that have controlled grip.
Interesting. Okay, so on land, the focus is often on repelling water and staying dry.
Right.
But what happens when we transition to the underwater world?
Yeah.
I would imagine that superhydrophobicity, which often relies on this trapped air, might have its limitations in the ocean, right?
You've hit on a crucial point. So superhydrophobic surfaces that depend on that trapped air, they tend to lose their effectiveness underwater.
Right.
Especially in the dynamic marine environment where, preventing the attachment and growth of organisms or biofouling is a major concern.
Right.
And so aquatic organisms have actually evolved entirely different strategies to deal with this challenge.
Okay, so no reliance on the tiny air pockets for our underwater friends.
No.
What's their secret then? How do they stay relatively clean?
So instead of repelling water, many aquatic organisms actually utilize hydrophilicity, meaning they attract water and soft surfaces to deter that biological growth.
Okay.
So think about the skin of sharks and whales, or even the surface of nacre, which is the iridescent inner layer of some shells like oysters.
Okay. Hydrophilic and soft.
Yeah.
So it almost seems counterintuitive to preventing things from sticking,
It does.
especially in a watery environment.
Right.
But I mean, there must be something to it.
What's particularly interesting here is the mechanism. So soft, water-loving surfaces, they can actually reduce drag as the organism moves through the water.
Okay.
So the interaction between the soft surface and the water can create what's called a laminar flow, which is a smooth, layered flow right at the boundary layer. And this can actually make it more difficult for fouling organisms to get a secure grip.
Okay. Gotcha. So by being slippery in a water-friendly way, they're discouraging the hitchhiker.
Exactly.
That's a clever twist.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's delve deeper into these bio-inspired anti-fouling strategies in the sea.
Sure.
And I think we can start with the well-known example of shark skin.
Okay.
I know it's more than just smooth.
It is. So shark skin is truly a marvel of biological engineering.
Okay.
While it's hydrophilic in air, it actually exhibits what's called superoliophobicity in water, meaning it repels oils very, very strongly. Its surface is covered in these unique tiny microstructures, kind of dermal denticles, and they're arranged in a very specific pattern of what are called riblets. These are tiny parallel ridges running along the shark's body.
Okay, so riblets like miniature grooves.
Yeah, think of them as like really, really small speed bumps.
Yeah, okay. What function do those serve? I mean, why are they there?
So these riblets, they play this crucial role in disrupting the flow of water right at the shark's surface.
Okay.
They effectively accelerate the water flow, which reduces the amount of time that fouling organisms have to make contact and attach.
Right.
Additionally, these riblets, they actually decrease the overall available surface area for these organisms to settle on in the first place.
Okay.
And what's even cooler is that the flexibility of the individual dermal scales allows for the release of any slime that might accumulate and can even help to physically dislodge any weakly attached organisms as the shark's moving.
Wow.
So it's really a multi-pronged defense system.
Right. So it's a combination of that microscopic texture and a degree of natural self-cleaning, I guess, through the movement and the slime.
Exactly.
And shark skin has been quite a significant source of inspiration, I know, for our own technologies.
Absolutely.
What about whales and carp?
Yeah.
Your sources indicate that their skin also possesses some really interesting anti-fouling characteristics.
Right. So a pilot whale skin, for instance, remains remarkably clean despite, the challenging marine environment that they're living in.
Right.
And scientists believe that this is due to a combination of both polar and non-polar functional groups on their skin's surface and within the intercellular gel.
Good.
And so this dual chemistry, it likely interferes with the adhesion of a broad range of fouling organisms,
Okay.
both in that initial attachment phase and then over longer periods of time.
Gotcha.
And then you couple that with, just the sheer size and movement of the whale.
Okay.
And the flow of water around the whale is undoubtedly contributing to physically removing any weakly adhered organisms.
Right. So a blend of surface chemistry that's acting as a deterrent.
Right.
Along with just, physical removal through movement.
Exactly.
What about the carp?
So grass carp, they employ a slightly different strategy.
Okay.
They have a hydrophilic mucus layer combined with hierarchical microstructures on the surface.
Okay.
And surprisingly, this combination leads to underwater superoliophobicity.
Okay.
This strong repulsion of oils, much like what we see in shark skin.
Wow.
And researchers have even been able to fabricate what are called biomimetic surfaces
Okay.
that mimic these properties of whale and carp skin using techniques like what's called layer-by-layer spray coating and hierarchical hybrid hydrogels.
Really interesting. It's amazing how all these different aquatic creatures have independently evolved these really unique and effective solutions to the same fundamental problem.
Yeah.
And then we have nacre, or mother of pearl.
Right.
I know that's exceptionally strong, but does it also play a role in anti-fouling?
So Nacre is primarily renowned for its mechanical strength and toughness,
Okay.
which arises from this really intricate layered brick and mortar structure composed of calcium carbonate platelets held together by organic biomacromolecules.
Okay.
But this very unique and densely packed structure, it has also inspired the fabrication of materials that have underwater self-cleaning properties,
Okay.
often based on that principle of underwater superoliophobicity.
Gotcha.
So the smooth, tightly packed surface makes it difficult for organisms to gain a foothold.
Okay, so strength and cleanliness.
That's right.
A valuable combination.
Right.
Okay, so we've explored nature's playbook in both terrestrial and aquatic environments.
Right.
Now, let's switch gears and see how we as humans are engineering our own antifouling coatings.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're drawing inspiration directly from biology. And sometimes we're taking entirely different approaches.
Right.
So the outline mentions self-assembled monolayers, or SAMs.
Yeah.
What exactly are those?
So SAMs are essentially ultra-thin films.
Okay.
They're just a single layer of molecules that spontaneously organize themselves into a well-ordered structure on a solid surface.
Okay.
They're a really powerful tool for precisely modifying the surface properties of a material at the molecular level.
Gotcha.
Think of it like carefully arranging microscopic tiles to create a specific pattern or texture.
Okay. Okay. And how do these single molecule layers help in preventing fouling?
So one common and effective strategy is using SAMs that are based on what's called polyethylene glycol, or PEG.
Okay.
And these PEGylated SAMs create these highly hydrated layers, so essentially a microscopic water barrier on the surface.
Okay.
And this water-rich environment effectively resists the absorption of proteins. And that's often the first step in that cascade of events that leads to biofouling.
Right.
Ethylene glycol, or OEG, is another similar molecule that can be used to create these anti-fouling SAMs.
Okay. So it's like you're creating this slippery, water-rich zone that biological molecules they don't want to adhere to.
That's right.
Are there other types of SAMs that are being explored for anti-fouling applications?
Yeah, researchers are actively looking at SAMs that are made from what are called zwitterionic molecules.
Okay.
These are molecules that actually possess both a positive and negative charge within the same molecule.
Okay.
And these tend to create highly hydrated and neutrally charged surfaces that are very effective at resisting that protein fouling.
Okay.
Additionally, there's interest in incorporating enzymes or functional polymers into the SAMs that could either actively deter settlement or have a lower environmental impact compared to traditional biocides.
Gotcha. Sounds like the main goal here is to engineer a surface that is fundamentally unattractive, I guess, for biological molecules to latch onto.
That's exactly right.
Now, what about amphiphilic copolymers?
Yes.
That's another term that popped up in the outline.
So amphiphilic copolymers are really fascinating because they contain both hydrophobic segments, so water repelling, and hydrophilic segments, so water attracting, within the same polymer chain.
Okay.
And so this dual nature can provide broad resistance against a really diverse range of fouling organisms.
Right.
And can also promote what's called fouling release,
Okay.
making it easier for anything that does attach to be removed.
Gotcha.
One example is coatings that are made from HBF-P PEG copolymers have demonstrated resistance to both proteins and algae.
Okay. So they can both deter the initial attachment and also encourage the detachment if something does manage to stick.
Exactly.
That's a really clever kind of dual action approach. And then we have muscle-inspired polymers.
Right.
This one sounds particularly interesting given, how effectively muscles stick to things underwater.
Right. So mussels are indeed notorious for their incredibly strong underwater adhesion.
Right.
And scientists have been studying their adhesive proteins, particularly this unique amino acid called DOPA,
Okay.
or 3,4,dihydroxyphenylalanine.
Wow.
And they've used this knowledge to create polymers, for example, MPEG-DOPA.
Okay.
And the DOPA component allows that polymer to strongly attach to a variety of different surfaces,
Right.
essentially acting as an anchor,
Okay.
while the MPEG, or methoxy polyethylene glycol component, provides those antifouling properties, reducing the attachment of cells and zoospores and enhancing their detachment under the force of water flow.
Okay. So taking nature's stickiness and turning it to our own slipperiness, I guess.
Yeah, it's a beautiful example of that.
That's a great illustration of bio-inspiration.
Mm.
Now let's talk about layer by layer assembly, or LBL.
Okay.
How does this technique work for creating anti-fouling surfaces?
So LBL assembly is this really versatile technique that involves building up thin films on a surface by sequentially absorbing layers of oppositely charged polyelectrolytes.
Okay.
These are polymers that carry an electrical charge.
Okay.
And the process is primarily driven by electrostatic interactions, so just the attraction between the positive and negative charges.
Gotcha.
And this allows for very precise control over the resulting film's thickness, composition, and ultimately its functionality.
Okay, so like you're stacking charged Lego bricks, but at the nanoscale.
That's a great analogy.
Okay.
So polyelectrolyte multilayers, or PEMs, made from materials like PP or PSS, are commonly studied for their ability to minimize bioadhesion.
Okay.
And so the overall surface charge of these PEMs, it can be precisely tailored during the assembly process.
Right.
To make the surface less attractive for those fouling organisms, many of which also carry surface charges.
Okay. So it's a really adaptable technique for creating customized, I guess, surface coatings with specific anti-fouling properties.
Right.
And what about polymer brushes?
Yeah.
The name kind of suggests that they might create like this dense, flexible forest on the surface.
Yeah, that's a good way to visualize it.
Okay.
So polymer brushes are these dense layers of long polymer chains that
Yeah.
are chemically attached to the surface at just one end.
Okay.
So they form this brush-like structure that extends away from the surface.
Okay.
PEGylated polymers, again, are a common example here, forming those effective hydrated layers that prevent the adhesion of proteins and cells.
Right.
Zwitterionic polymers, such as those based on phosphorylcholine, also form highly hydrated brushes with excellent anti-adsorption properties. And the density of these polymer chains on the surface, so the graft density and their length, play a crucial role in how effective they are at repelling those biological materials.
Okay. So it's just a dense, hydrated barrier made up of these flexible polymer chains.
Exactly.
What about the bio-inspired polymers that are mentioned in this section?
Right. So here you see the incorporation of materials like chitosan,
Okay.
which is this ketosionic polysaccharide derived from chitin and has inherent antibacterial activity.
Okay.
And halamines are another class of antimicrobial compounds that can be incorporated into the polymer brushes to actively combat biofouling.
Gotcha.
Silver nanoparticles are also being explored for their well-established antibacterial properties,
Right.
with mechanisms that include damaging DNA, generating reactive oxygen species, and disrupting cell membranes. And the challenge here is to effectively and stably immobilize these nanoparticles on the surfaces to provide long-lasting anti-fouling without any unwanted release.
Gotcha. So it's kind of a multifaceted approach.
Right.
Utilizing, hydration, surface charge, even direct antimicrobial action to prevent the fouling.
Exactly.
Now, the outline mentions graft 2 approaches and surface-initiated polymerization.
Right.
Are these just simply different methods for creating these polymer brush layers?
Precisely. So graft 2 approaches involve first synthesizing the antifouling polymer,
Okay.
such as PEG, and then chemically attaching it to the surface.
Right.
Using a reactive group or an adhesive linker molecule.
Right.
Surface-initiated polymerization, on the other hand, involves directly growing the polymer chains from initiator molecules that are already anchored to the surface.
Gotcha.
Polyionic liquid brushes grafted via ROMP are a good example of this,
Yep.
showing both antimicrobial and anti-biofouling properties, particularly against algae.
Interesting. Okay, so that gives me a solid overview of the chemical strategies that are being employed.
Yeah.
Now let's turn our attention to purely structural approaches.
Okay.
Creating micro and nanostructures on surfaces to prevent fouling.
Right.
Sometimes we're drawing inspiration from nature, and sometimes it's through these novel engineering designs.
Right.
So what are we seeing here?
So this is where the physical design of the surface itself becomes the primary anti-fouling mechanism.
Okay.
And so researchers have been really extensively investigating how the size, geometry, and overall roughness of the surface features at the micro nanoscale affect the settlement and growth of these marine biofouling organisms.
Okay.
And so engineered patterns such as channels, ridges, pillars, even the sharklet pattern, which is directly inspired by sharkskin,
Okay.
have been tested for their impact on the settlement of algal zoospores.
Right.
And generally what we've seen is that smaller surface features tend to be more effective at reducing that settlement.
Okay. So it's essentially making the surface physically inhospitable
Exactly.
or difficult for organisms to get a good foothold.
That's right. So the attachment point theory provides a framework for understanding this.
Okay.
It suggests that the strength of an organism's adhesion is directly related.